Shadowline trim on a BMW X6 E71. Look how tight these this tolerance is between the trim and the upper gasket, aka the upper weather stripping. That is such a tight fit. Also here, yeah, the Shadowline trim, if you didn't get your BMW X6M or you didn't get a Shadowline package on your BMW X6, but you're now like, I want the black trim, there's kind of two options that you can pursue. You can pursue buying the Shadowline trim, either aftermarket or pre-owned, or shopping from the BMW parts catalog and probably spending close to $1,500 just on the parts alone. I know that this top part here is like $189 from any BMW parts dealer. If you order from the dealer, you're probably looking at a 25% markup on top of that, which makes things kind of ridiculous. So you're looking at about $1,500 in parts alone if you do want to buy the Shadowline trim and install it. So your other option is to wrap your trim, and there are a number of videos on YouTube on how to wrap trim, and every single one of them, including professionals, are simply topically applying the wrap to these different parts, and then what they're doing is they're cutting along the edges with X-Acto knives and tucking the trim. As you just saw, you can't tuck the trim on this X6. That is just, the tolerances are so fine between the upper gasket weather stripping and the top of the trim, it's just not possible to tuck this trim. So what I've done is I've pursued a third option, and that option is literally to remove every single one of these pieces of trim and then wrap those pieces of trim while they're off the vehicle. That way I don't get the little raw edges and the occasional little piece of chrome that's still showing, you know, if you're slipped with your X-Acto knife or it wasn't just perfect. I wanted this to look perfect. I wanted this to look just like Shadowline trim, and I got it. So here's the video of me putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, taking the stuff off and wrapping it while it's off the car. All right, it appears as if the best place to start on this to get all of the dominoes to fall is on the driver's side. Definitely popping of this little bolt that's back here. Sorry about the light. And then being able to peel that rubber gasket on the top back. All right, and it won't just fall off like that. You have to then get a pry tool like this pry tool, and then start by pushing this direction back here against this trim. Push in this direction, and that's when it's going to release the rubber down here as well, and it's going to be where this piece of trim actually starts moving. So that trim is now going to be able to come off this way. I'll need both hands for it. And now I'm going to wash down every part with soap and water. For this particular piece over the top of the window, the driver's side window, I bought 3" by 75 feet of the Chrome Delete in matte black. And then for this slender piece, I've cut that 3" piece in half all the way down. That way I'm not wrangling a bunch of material that I'm really just going to cut away in the end. As you can see, I've started on the tip here, and I'm slowly shaping the wrap to the piece of trim as I'm going along here, and then removing the backing as I fit the wrap to the rest of the trim here as I move along. This piece is not so sharply curved that I can't get the wrap to cling to it and mold to it. So just being nice and slow, going slow, and putting the wrap along the leading edge, the front edge of this trim. All right, now that it's on the fascia, I'm turning it over and I'm wrapping as much of that I can underneath here like this. All the way down to where the rearview mirror begins. I just decided to roll the rest of the excess around the top. That's why I had a really thin piece to begin with. And then that just goes nicely into the ridges there. So it virtually disappears behind the trim piece. Now, the clips that you're going to be battling against while you're taking this off, this is the top by the back of the front door. So that's got 2 clips there. That's why you don't start back there. You start all the way up at the front where you only have 1 clip. So yeah, word of advice, start near the front. You start putting these back on. You see the 2 clips there. I'm in the top right-hand corner of the driver's side door. Those 2 clips, you'll roll over the edge of the metal flange there, making sure that this lines up here, and then apply pressure. When you do start that, make sure that this little hook here is around in this piece of metal here. Try to get real close. Make sure that that hook is pushed on that way. Then make sure that those clips are around the red body flange. Then apply pressure all the way down. When you get to the front here, make sure that this rubber gasket, your weather strip, is around the bottom here before you start settling it in, or else the trim is going to keep you from getting that rubber gasket around the bottom. So before you go pushing it in all the way, make sure that rubber gasket or weather stripping is along the bottom. Now make sure you're getting this on correctly. You can actually see those trim pieces or those clips and where they are relative to the red flange that they go on. Make sure that through this slit, as you're putting this on, you see that the clips are actually going around the red flange. And that's that little piece of red that's in between the lower weather strip and the trim that you see there. I'm going to make sure that clip goes underneath the red. This puzzle piece coming back together again, you're going to have the challenge of getting this weather stripping on the top back into the little narrow groove that's along the top of your chrome trim. My best recommendation for that through trial and error is to come from behind with your weight and then roll the weight forward from behind along the entire way, and you'll kind of hear it going like click, click, clack, click. And it'll all come back in like that. You might have to go over it a few times. Another piece of advice is don't stretch this rubber piece that way too far from the origin back behind the rearview mirror, because then if you do stretch it to get it too taut too soon, this piece of rubber will stretch to the point where the grommet of the rubber will be too far away for you to put the grommet in again. Trial and error. This time I put it in without stretching it. All right, getting that rubber grommet back in, go 1 layer at a time. First, put it through the rubber, then push it into the metal. Now, starting in the back seat. All right, I've already started here a little bit, but this is the piece of rubber here. You want to start by removing that slowly and carefully. And then that's going to come up and around here and finally stop right down here. All right, you want to take that off first. Way around with this one, I just stopped right here, leaving the rest so that I've got a good starting place. This one, just by putting my screwdriver here and then giving my screwdriver a swift kick in the butt, and it popped it to this point in time, or this point, and I'm just going to slowly and carefully remove the rest with constant pressure. All right, you see this little ridge here on the top? That ridge, given how difficult it was to get the rubber gasket weather strip back into that little ridge, which makes almost a seamless transition from the rubber gasket into the trim, that I'm going to cut the wrap out of that so that there's no wrap in there whatsoever. The tolerance to get that rubber trim gasket back in there is so fine, I don't even want the trim in there. So I'm going to cut right down the middle of that groove and then pull out what wrap I can. And so as it is right now, here is the driver's side that I did, leaving that little gutter, look at that, leaving that little gutter still with some wrap in it. As you can see, that needs to be redone. I'm a perfectionist. I'm going to redo that because this is what it looks like when you don't leave any wrap in that gutter. Perfect. So that one's going to get rewrapped. Trial and error, baby. All right, moving back along the back of the car, starting with the rear driver's door. There's that flange, and it does move in the up direction. And this one may take a little bit of prying. I did for quite some time ago get a set of pry tools. And the big pry tool is what it took to push it in there and then wiggle it back and forth until it popped up. Now it's pretty much, I don't think there's a clip in there. I think it's just pretty much all friction. So this thing goes on there real tight. Well, there might be a clip. We'll see. We'll take a look at the anatomy once I get it off. All right, so here's the anatomy. I do not see a clip in there. This is all just held into place on this really long flange here with friction. All right, after wrapping, since this is a complete friction part, I found it best just to put a folded up towel on there and then lightly with a rubber mallet, just keep tamping it down, tamping it down. This back piece is looking pretty easy. I just put a screwdriver in here and look, you can already see it starting to come up. Okay, make sure you're not pulling the weather stripping along with it. So once that metal part starts to move, just make sure that the metal part's the part that you're pulling off. Let's see. Yep, that comes off the easiest of any of the parts. That one's going to be a breeze to wrap. My 2 foot by 5 foot sheet of matte black and that C pillar, aka quarter window sheet right here, or piece right here. Just going to flip that over, cut a piece to the size of this, and then trim it up around it and wrap that piece. All right, so here you can see the C-pillar trim and how it is kind of roughly wrapped. And so then what I'm going to do is trim a little bit more and then just stretch it around the back, since this looks to have very few tolerances at all that are fine. So just going to wrap that up, maybe a little cut here and in the corners to kind of loosen it up a little bit and then stretch it around. Okay, you might think that when you start this project that this quarter window trim or this C-panel trim is going to be the fun part, but in reality, this is now wrapped. This is the 3rd attempt. It took me 3 attempts to get this thing wrapped. The first time, the wrap was splitting here along this edge here, and so I had to rewrap it because it's split, because that's where this piece plunges. Make sure as you're pushing this down here to slowly crop that rest of the trim away, and then just push it down nice and easy. And if you have to, I didn't have to get a heat gun or a hair dryer, but if you have to, warm it up with a hair dryer just to get it really nice and stretchy. If there is a stretchy portion to this project, that is it right there. And then the second time I got FOD, foreign object or debris, underneath the wrap. And so I had like a couple of, kernels of sand or whatever popping out. I'm like, ah. So yeah, that's the 3rd time I had to wrap it. Now for this lower piece here in the front, yes, it's true. You got to take off your inner door card and then loosen your rear view mirror and then unplug your rear view mirror to remove this piece of trim from the door. But because it's just a single piece, and I've cut this trim into 1.5 inch strips, I'm just going to wrap this one on the car. No big deal. I'm just going to use my panel pry tool to tamp it down into the corners. So as you're rolling this back, don't quite be so random about rolling it back. Take mental notes. Notice that this inside is in between the interior weather stripping, and then so you've got one channel there you've got to put it back in, right? So it's straddling this, and then on this side you've got this other metal piece, or this other channel filler here, and that's going right into this gap here. So take note of that when you start putting it back in. This is going to stay here, this weather stripping, and you're just going to kind of hold that weather stripping back as you put this back in, and then it'll straddle this, right? So just always kind of take notes. And then down here, this is the way this is supposed to look when you put it back in. So you got this triangle coming out here, and then this definitely tucks in behind here, and then you're going to find a little I guess, knot there, or a peg that you're going to put this piece of rubber around here, and that's the anchor for this piece of rubber. So make sure that that's anchored on that peg, and then it goes triangularly down here, and then it vanishes behind the weather stripping. So the weather stripping here is the last layer. This piece of trim that's down behind the rearview mirror here, take note of this brush-shaped item on the trim, and see how it's broken into 3 pieces? That is going to line up with these 3 pieces here. When you wrap this, make sure that this is unobstructed by wrap, because these need to fit very carefully back into these 3 pieces right here. It's like a comb. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start this whole process off again by hooking this up to this here and starting to put the rubber and everything back on this. I need all my hands for this. Okay, so now this is what you got here. The seal between the trim and the actual seal right there is extremely narrow. So I'm pushing that back in here, and I have those 3, that comb-like thing. I've got that all lined up there, and then that hole here is ready to go onto that knob. So now I'm going to put it on and work my way from the front of the door backwards. All right, here's the difference between a professional job and a half-assed job. Okay, so I was able to get this rubber around this this bolt here, and it looks like it's one of the bolts that holds the rear view mirror on. So I got the rubber around here. What I did was I took a screwdriver, and I was pretty aggressive with it and pushed that down around this edge here, and then pushed the rest of that rubber up, back, around onto the top. So that must be done, or else you're gonna have a whole bunch of like crap hanging out here, and it's not gonna be even, and it's gonna look like a teenager did it. So that is very important. All right, so given how I'm learning as I'm doing this, I've noticed that this being my my wrapped portion of trim, this is the gasket that is the upper portion of trim that, you know, you pull away, that sits on top of that trim. I've noticed that this goes a lot easier if you're actually putting this in as you're pressing this back on. So you do, 3 to 5 inches of it, you press it in, and then you move on and you continue doing 3 to 5 inches, 3 to 5 inches, 3 to 5 inches. Remember, don't stretch it because then you're going to wind up all cocked up on the end. So that matches right now as it is. You don't need to stretch it, but put it in, 3 to 5 inches at a time as you're pushing that panel, that trim panel back on. I'm not afraid to show that close up. A little bit of armor all on there. Kind of oops to that. Got this one back the way it should be, with the rubber gasket snug against the trim. And that all came down to having this spot on here with the 3, like the comb going right up into that trim, and then having that button, the rubber over that button down here. That is so critical. And then making sure that each clip was actually on the flange that you're pushing the clips back onto. And then down here on the bottom, I wasn't gonna take that mirror off and everything. I mean, I could have done it. I've done the bath sound speaker upgrade on this, and I could have gone in and done it, but that would have been, another hour. This one was a pain in the butt, as you guys saw. Had to wail on this with a hammer to get it back on because it's held on pretty much exclusively with friction. No clips. It is just tight as a fucker. Anyway, so this was interesting. I had to wrap these 3 times the first time just to kind of understand how to get the wrap right. And I think the secret is actually stretching it, like as you're getting around here, just stretching it evenly, and then that way it actually gets bigger down here so you can push it and wrap it around. That or a heat gun, But yeah, same side is, this is the first side I did, so the other side is actually better. In that, you know, I knew what I was doing going in. It went faster. I didn't make the same mistakes the first time. So yeah, it's, you know, 3M, what's it called? 3M Chrome Delete. Make sure that you get, this was an issue. Make sure you get the same matte, semi, or gloss for the single 5x2 sheet that you do for the Chrome Delete, because Chrome Delete by and large is only sold in gloss. I did some research into Shadowlines, and Shadowline trim could be purchased in either a gloss or a matte. Matte doesn't mean it's not Shadowline, gloss doesn't mean it's not Shadowline. It just depends upon what you wanted to order, or if what was available. So make sure that you get the sheet that matches your you know, your roll of tape or whatever of Chrome Delete, and go to town. This is not an easy job. On the surface, yeah, it's just trim or whatever, but it's, you know, each piece is like, it's got its own personality, and especially the trim piece up here on top, it's like a puzzle piece where you have to put in like all of the last 4 puzzle pieces at the same time. You can't just put, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's got to be like all 4 pieces at the same time. So, I mean, was it worth it? I mean, you know, I wanted my car to look a little bit more sporty. Kind of got tired of the dad chrome, so I Chrome deleted this. I'm gonna do the, I'm gonna wrap the kidney verticals only and leave the actual outline kidneys chrome. You'll see that in my next video. Thanks, guys.